Advisory Council for their funds. We have a great lineup this spring. This is the first to kick off a fantastic series. The next one will not be currently until March. Keep your eyes posted for the posters. They will be up shortly. Again, thank you for making it out tonight. With that, Ross?
So thanks everyone for coming. This is a really good turnout. I'm really happy to see this. Can everyone hear me okay? So I can't sort of say how nice it is to be able to introduce Elia Zenghelis to you tonight. It is a huge, huge honor to have a figure as large and important as Elia is and has been for, and it's not an understatement, for the entire discourse and practice of architecture. I think at least in the last 40 or 50 years, I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to have him come also from so far away, and not only for giving us a kind of beautiful lecture that he's going to give tonight, but to also be running a master class. And I'm really looking forward to how this is going to be working out. Elia, of course, is the kind of figure who, there's always a cliche of, oh, he needs no introduction. I won't belabor the point. In a way, it's a cliche that works in this case. Elia, of course, as you know, was a founding member of the Office of Metropolitan Architecture, along with Rem Koolhaas, Madelon Vriesendorp, and Elia Zenghelis. In 1975, I think it was, the name was chosen, but they've been practicing already since as early as 1969, when Rem was Elia's student. So Elia was a kind of very important mentor in this process. And I think it's also safe to say that the work that they did in the period that Elia was with OMA was arguably the most important work in the portfolio of OMA to date. And I think we're going to have a chance to look at some of that. After leaving OMA in 1985, Elia continued, I think, what he had been doing for a while before, which was his role as a kind of educator. And it's a more humble, silent role than the normal constellation of superstar architects and things that we're always familiar with. But I think it's been an immense kind of, again, contribution and transformation, really, of the discourse and the way we think about architecture today that Elia has had. I first met Elia when he came to the Berlage, and he and a young Pier Vittorio Aureli were leading a studio in Tirana, Albania. And he was one of the reasons I actually came to the Berlage. And a few years later, I managed to have the privilege of having Elia as kind of a mentor within the studio that we took together for the master program with Pier Vittorio Aureli, and he was kind of constantly a figure coming and going within the studio. And I remember very distinctly having a bowl of borscht in Moscow with him, which I'll never forget. And since then, we've been working together at the Bartlett and sort of meeting up all sorts of places in the AA and in London. And I think it's a great honor that I can also personally say he's a friend of mine. So I won't say much more. I think I'll just turn it over to Elia, but I think we should all give a very nice welcome to Elia.
Thank you very much, Ross. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for inviting me to come here. I'm very excited to be here, and particularly because we're going to have this week-long workshop. In fact, it's more than a week. It's 10 days or something. Yeah. And I really am looking forward to that and to the results. And I'm looking forward also to soon be lecturing on the results of this workshop with the images that I will be collecting at the end of it. Since I've never been here before, this is my first, I don't know, is this too loud? It feels to me that it's too loud.
I'm going to take it down just a little bit.
A little bit. Is that better now? Great. It's better for me too. I mean, my own voice was giving me a headache already. it's so anyway, since it's the first time I'm here, I thought it was an opportunity to show you a collection of my work from more or less its very beginnings, way back in the late 60s, up to the present, up to, in fact, 2014. I begin by trying to give you kind of a picture of the context of the historical situation within which I started work. I studied at the AA in London, and my teacher and mentor was Peter Smithson of the Team 10 group, who was a fifth-year master when I graduated. And I soon went into practice. I went into the office of Douglas Stephen and Partners, where young architects like Ken Frampton and a few others were working. And I worked there for about 8 years, but it's only, I was really put on to running buildings designed by others, which in a way was very good experience. But then I decided to go into my own work in the late 60s. So I'll try to give you a picture of what the situation in the 60s and generally in the 60s was. It was the decade of pop culture. It was a decade of the fashion shops in London, in Carnaby Street and Mary Quant. It was the decade of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. It was great fun to live that period in London. And I took part in that fun. But the same thing was happening within the architectural context. This kind of desire for glamour and pop fashion was all pervasive. And there was one group that dominated the scene. That was a group of Archigram, led primarily by Peter Cook, who is now a very good friend of mine, but at that time was the enemy. It was the enemy because somehow we felt that what they were doing was, at least I felt, was removing architecture from its its solidity of permanence. And I think that in a way architecture has that, of all the arts, it has that particular characteristic, and that it is its relative permanence. Hence, we still have examples of it still being very much alive, like, for instance, the Acropolis in Athens. One of the topics that I have given to the students who are going to take part in the workshop to explore. So anyway, as I said, the Archigram group was the group that I set, especially when Rem came into my unit as a student, and we started the beginnings of a collaboration that, at least for the next 15 years, proved to be very fruitful. We decided to develop a polemic that would counter the fashion of the time, and to try to engage in a debate between what was popular and what we thought should be popular. This is an image of one of them, of the celebrated projects of Archigram. It's the walking city. It's a walking city that crosses the Atlantic on its way to New York, with Archigram's celebrated plug-in city in the background. One thing that was a catalytic in our work and in our decision to become really seriously involved was a very, very important event that happened or that occurred in Paris in the late 60s, and that was the events of May 1968. It was an event when a very large set of discontent in France was taking place, in which time factory strikes involving 11 million workers, which is basically 22% of the total population of France, together were joined by students who were discontent with the teaching methods and the oppressive and authoritarian teaching methods in the universities, and in particular architecture students. Architecture students dominated a kind of uprising that more or less shook the world. France, what happened was illustrated even in all the newspapers, and even in the kind of most important magazines in France, like Paris Match. And part in that uprising, students and strikers went ahead into destroying what they saw as the status quo in Paris. At that time, France feared the revolution, seriously feared the revolution, and President Charles de Gaulle secretly left France for a few hours to seek shelter across the border into Germany. These pictures show you what happened the day after, what happened in one night, and these are the pictures the day after. Apart from upturning cars and destroying whatever they could, one of the things that in particular the strikers did was to lift the paving and the pavement off the roads. And the symbol of this shuddering event was the by now celebrated slogan, "Sous les pavés la plage," which translates into "under the paving stones lies the beach," with the beach standing for the freedom of life on the beach, in other words, liberty, from oppression, which was symbolized by the paving slabs. It was a slogan that by now is kind of quite famous, that was pasted all over the city. And here I show you a series of photographs that show you the various writings on the walls, even on neon light, in art exhibitions, the same slogan, under the paving, the beach. And with students of architecture in particular, this was taken sometimes a step further, in that the paving stones were reassembled into various volumetric forms. And these are all photographs from Paris at the time. And I conclude this kind of summary of the May events of 1968 with, there were all sorts of other slogans placed all over the place. One of them being this very important one, which says, "Il est interdit d'interdire," which means it is forbidden to forbid. What the impact of this, though, had a negative effect on the students of architecture, mostly, and on young architects, if you like, in the sense that suddenly architecture was seen as being, because it was a kind of a top-down occupation, it was deemed to be fascist, to be a fascist occupation. And at the same time, it was a decade when marijuana and smoking pot was all pervasive. I mean, it was impossible to avoid it, almost. I mean, you went into parties. The way it affected me was that it was putting me to sleep. So I did not like it, because I could not enjoy the party, because I would fall into an armchair and I would wake up the next morning. But you couldn't avoid it, because in the food you were offered, like in the cakes, it was in the food. So if you didn't smoke it, you ate it. And in this atmosphere, it was really pretty hard. I was already beginning to teach, because for me, suddenly, this is one thing that I have to say, very important thing in my life was to never from the day I stopped being a student, I felt very melancholic. And I decided to never lose contact with students. So I started teaching 2 years after I graduated. And I remember when I went to the AA, to the registrar, and I said, you know, I would like to teach. He laughed, "Zenghelis, you want to teach already?" Anyhow, somehow I did. Ever since, I never regretted it. Because not only I've always been learning from students, because students always come up with unexpected ideas that the exhaustion of experience slowly erases, but also they form extremely good colleagues and collaborators. So I've always seen my teaching career as a form of collaborating and also continuing being a student. But as I said, after these events, I mean, it became a very tough job. Students what were then called jury rooms for the juries, which later on became euphemistically became reviews. They would cook these cakes with pot inside, and they would sit around the bowl of rice, discussing the world, but not drawing a single line. And that went on for a very long time. And they graduated. However, there was a movement going on at the same time in Italy, in which the critique of architecture became much more serious, and was one in which architects and young architects decided to show the qualities, the primordial qualities, if you like, of architecture in another form, as a form of critique of the establishment. These were the groups, especially from Florence, that were called the Italian radicals. I'm going to show you a few key projects from these groups that had an enormous influence on our work with Rem. One was a project called No Stop City by a group called Archigram in Florence. And this project was, in their terms, an architectural interpretation of society, if you like, of corrupt society, as it was at the time. This kind of society concerned only with money and with acquiring property and with fun. So these No Stop City was this endless, continuous project. The plan of which was like the plan of a supermarket. So it was like an endless supermarket. It didn't amount to a specification for putting up a building. It was even abandoning even the desire to do buildings, and it was using architecture in another very powerful way, as critique, but still through very beautiful architectural drawings. This is another image of No Stop City, kind of going on endlessly, and a few other projects which were kind of humorous, even disrespectful, blasphemous, if you like, and iconoclastic, but still had a certain power. Like this housing project, they called it, which was like a table over the Duomo in Florence. The other group also started with Florence. They were in Florence. They also were from Florence, and they started with an image in which they saw Florence being flooded with only the tops of monuments coming out and their reflection on the water. And this group was Super Studio. And this continuous luminous surface of water became also a monument that they called the continuous monument, that was supposed to circle around the whole globe and on its way go through the most important cities in the world, like here, for instance, the continuous monument going through New York. Here it is over the coasts, the coast of Cornwall, on the countryside, in the countryside. And it was this endless gridded surface from which afterwards they started making furniture. There were tables made out of this, there were chairs made out of this. It became a kind of key feature of that group, Archigram, Super Studio. And it was at this point that Rem came to me as a student, but he was already 24, and I was 30, so we only had 6 years difference. And he was already quite mature. He was very, very passionate about architecture. He had, in fact, he often knew more about architecture than his tutors. He had, and in particular, he had gone to Russia several times, studying the work of Russian constructivists, and in particular the work of Ivan Leonidov. And something that happened to coincide with my own interests, because I was also very much involved with the architecture of constructivism. And he came to me with this, with a kind of page of paper with these sketches and these statements, which the two first statements, in a way, became a sort of premise guiding the principles of what we did ever since. These I'll just read from them. A city is a plain of tarmac with some red hotspots of urban intensity. These red hotspots, that's the second sketch, radiate city sense. If not taken care of properly, it tends to quickly ebb away. And I'm not sorry. I won't read any further. And so here we are. Soon we were working together with our respective wives, both of whom were painters. So from left to right, Madelon, Vriesendorp, then Rem, the short, fat little guy with a suitcase is me, and to the right, Zoe, my wife. Rem did a very powerful, and Rem happens to be an extremely good writer as well. He has this talent to write very intelligently and very fast. And he, in his what was then called the history thesis, which basically amounted to an obligation by students to take an important building like the Duomo, let's say in Florence, and go measure it up somehow, and then draw it, painstakingly draw it in plans, sections, elevations. What Rem did was something that was controversial, but anyway, it was accepted, and it was passed with great success. And that was, he went into Berlin to study the Berlin Wall. As you probably know, in those days, Germany there were two Germanys. One was the West Germany, which was a kind of a capitalist country allied to the West. And the other one was East Germany, which was a communist country allied to the USSR in Russia. But within that within that communist country, within Eastern Germany, Berlin, it was agreed by the victorious countries of the Second World War, in other words, between the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Russia. They were the four allies, to keep Berlin and to divide it into four sectors that each country would really have, that each of the four allies would kind of administer. So within the Berlin, there was this weird little island of the Western Europe, administered by the four allies, basically the three allies, because the Russians decided we will give our sector to the Germans. It's only you who want still to dominate a free country. So what happened was that the inhabitants of the DDR, the German Democratic Republic, as it was called, the communist part of Berlin, and which was in the center of the communist country, of Eastern Germany, started fleeing towards the western part, because obviously life was better there. And soon this became an exodus of really very, very of enormous proportions, so that the kind of the eastern, the largest part of this big metropolis was being emptied, with the inhabitants all coming in and getting and seeking shelter, either in the American sector, or the British sector, or the French sector. So the authorities of the East, in 1961, first put on a barbed wire and guarded around the three sectors, the British, the French, and the American. And later they built a wall. And in front of this wall there were kind of a series of whole field of electrified barriers. The whole a kind of wide area of East Berlin was cleared of all buildings, so that, and then the guards would watching. Anyone trying to escape was being shot at. And very many East Germans trying to escape into the West got killed. So Rem examined this phenomenon, and his main reason was to show the power that the most important architectural element has, the wall, the power that it has over people. And also the fact that because of its opacity, it always generates a sort of curiosity or desire to either see or go to the other side. There's always another side, the other side of the wall, which becomes almost a desired place for those who are on the other side. So soon we used this thesis of Rem in the first competition that we did together. And the reason we got together was also that we had each taken part, before we didn't even know each other, we each had taken part in another competition, which was for the City Hall of Amsterdam. And our two projects happened to be very, very similar. I mean, almost coincidentally identical, and also not at all fashionable, not in any way in keeping with what was then the trend, what were then the trends. And this got us close, and we became very close friends. And we decided to take part in a kind of very strange competition that was issued by the Italian architectural magazine Casabella, which was had only a kind of the vague title of The City as Significant Environment. Not much of a clue as to what to do with such a title. So we decided to take the premises of Rem's history thesis, and to take two walls, two walls running right through the center of London, which was the city in which we lived. We both lived at the time. And then to develop a whole narrative that would support the if you like, the magnetism of not only the wall, but of architecture itself, in a climate that was very contemptuous of architecture, and in particular of monumental architecture. So we decided to make our project extremely monumental, and we filled the space between these two walls with what we felt with a series of collective facilities, in order to reinforce the desire to use the city for collective purposes in a climate where the withdrawal from the public realm, the withdrawal of the public realm into the privacy of the suburbs was taking place. From that moment, I also, and as you will see later from work that I do with students, I developed an analogy to suburbs, in that I feel that they become a sort of endless process which, on the one hand, withdraws from the city and from the kind of a public participation in events in the city, and at the same time destroy the nature by completely consuming the nature, so that we, especially in Europe, where which is very densely populated. Here you don't have the problem because you still have lots of territory and lots of countryside. But in Europe, the problem becomes really acute. But at the same time, it makes people no longer live together, or even want to live together, which is the sole purpose for having cities. There's no point in having a city unless people want to participate in that city and in the events of that city, in the public life of the city. So we ran these two walls, and then in the analogy of the Berliners who were running into the western sector of Berlin, we did this kind of these red lines show kind of housing being built by the people who lived outside this central strip, trying to escape into the interior. With that competition, we did a series of collages that were taken from the Berlin Wall, but also from sort of images of potentially ideal, but not quite real events on the other side, like here, for instance, taken from Life magazine, an image of Manhattan taken with, I don't know what they called it, with heat. So, yes, with thermal cameras. And also from we tried to kind of mix all sorts of images that had a certain symbolism, like, for instance, from the film Metropolis by Fritz Lang, and also showing the kind of all the kind of horrible equipment that the East Germans had put around the wall, And we called the project Exodus, or the Voluntary Prisoners of Architecture. So it was that once you became a prisoner inside your, it was an attempt to kind of invert to invert values, if you like. So what was good was becoming bad, what was bad was becoming good, what was accepted as one was becoming its opposite. So here is the arrival. And in order not to take too much time, more of the iconography, both of the Berlin Wall, of prison life, of celebrations, of Manhattan, as a kind of ideal not reached, became part of our submission of this competition. We had the kind of a public baths, which was a kind of a recycling of private and public events around the baths. Here we had what we called the square. These were various names of the various squares. The square of biological emergencies, which basically was the hospital, if you like, of the Strip, and it and in which we incorporated isometrics, axonometrics of our earlier projects that got us to know each other for the Amsterdam Town Hall. This was Rem's project, and this was mine. And diagonally, we followed the hospital sequence of a very famous hospital in Barcelona, the Pau Hospital, where every pavilion, there was a series of pavilions, and a kind of a conveyor belt, more or less, leading from one to the other, dealing with with diseases which become more and more serious, and of course the conveyor belt diagonally then leads to the cemetery. But as a counter to the collective life, we also proposed kind of a private allotments where people cultivated their own gardens, but also their own pieces of architecture. Again, the iconography, on the other side, you are inside the Strip here, but on the other side you have the guards of the hostile country trying to stop people from coming in. Here also we have a kind of section of Los Angeles with houses and swimming pools inside the private allotments of the Strip. And here we have the inhabitants, which is basically a group of prisoners. It's taken from a photograph of a book of prisoners singing. Following the kind of constructivist principle that a social condenser basically is a building that is like a stone thrown in a still pond, and then when you throw this stone in the pond, then it creates a certain ripples, and these are the effect or the impact of that the stone has on the pond. We did finally a final map of what we claimed would be the effect of our project on London. And finally this project was published in the magazine Casabella, and it was it even appeared on the front cover. That project, if you like, was in some ways quite arrogant, but it was so because we saw that it was important to develop a polemic to counter the tendencies that we thought were kind of going against architecture. Ever since then, I believe that architecture as one of the most important cultural, primordial cultural products of humankind, it appears from the earliest civilizations as, and when it is even almost always allied with the religions and the faiths of those civilizations, that therefore I believe that there is a side to architecture which is not necessarily doing buildings that have to be built, really, but also doing projects that may not be buildable or that often are buildable but not in the particular moment when they are born, but which nevertheless are very important in maintaining and in continuing the tradition that has been established from the beginnings of civilization. In a way, architecture is a very, very important part of human civilization, and it has many sides to it, not only building buildings for clients. After our stint at London, we moved to the United States. We fell in love with Manhattan and with the architecture of Manhattan, and in particular Rem, who stayed there longer, and who wrote the book that you probably all are familiar with, Delirious New York. And in that visit, in that period during that stay, the work of Madelon, Vriesendorp, became very important in that she saw the buildings of Manhattan as having a personality with their weaknesses and their passions, to the extent that they fall in love and they go to bed with one another, like here, the Chrysler Building, in love with the Empire State, are in bed. The dirigible, the blimp that used to travel up in the skies, has become the condom here, kind of deflated condom. And they're caught in the action by the RCA building. Here they are again in bed. And the buildings of Manhattan, like an audience, is watching them making love. And it was at this point that Rem and Zoe Zenghelis produced this very important interpretation of architecture based on Manhattan and the Manhattan grid, called the Square of the Captive Globe. The Captive Globe, which is in the center, is kind of represents Central Park, around which you have the grid. And the argument there, the polemic, is that what is really important, and that what is a lesson that one draws from Manhattan, is the fact that if you have the discipline of the grid and you have identical blocks kind of as bases, then you can do on top anything you like. Any kind of ideology can take place. And so here you have this kind of the ideologies that debate or that fight one another, from the Plan Voisin by Le Corbusier here to kind of a Dali Angelus interpretation of Millet's painting, to constructivist, socialist realist architecture, to Messian architecture, and so on and so forth. I mean, everything is represented. The RCA building, the super studio, expressionism in the cinema, and so on and so forth. Became kind of, if you like, a standard symbol of what the office stood for. And it was then that we decided to call the office OMA, Office for Metropolitan Architecture. In fact, it was on the New Year's Day of 1975, New Year's Eve, in fact, where we kind of went out to a party. And at the party, we decided to give it the name Office for Metropolitan Architecture. I will now, having made this kind of fairly lengthy introduction to the work of OMA, I will kind of run faster onto a series of projects that were done at the time around New York. And I will focus on the projects, on my projects that were either mine or that done jointly with Rem. And in one case, together with Zaha Hadid, who had been our student at the AA in the 70s, in the late 70s. This is a project of mine on the East River. I'll move on to the next one, which for me was more important, the project that I called Hotel Sphinx. I had always been fascinated, even from childhood, with hotels. And in New York, I also was confronted with the idea of the welfare hotel, basically hotels for people who could not afford to live and rent, and who almost like shelters, and by the fact that they had the reputation of being filled with bums who urinated in the corridors and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, if you gave them the luxury of a Hilton, they will not urinate in the corridors, and they will be happy. And that, so I thought that, you know, I should design a hotel that had these luxuries, and that would be a welfare hotel. And I called it Hotel Sphinx. It's in the junction of 7th Avenue and Broadway, facing the Times building. Its form is kind of, you may not believe it, but its form is kind of derived by a very beautiful orange juicer that Madelon had in her house. Here is a facade of it. And you can see whether the kind of orange juice with it, where you press it down and the juice comes out the bottom. And it had the front that was facing the Times building, that was a kind of, you like, a polemical front, kind of countering the Times building front itself. And of course, within it was the tribune for Lenin to come out and speak to the masses, designed by. Because people then started complaining and saying, what are these ridiculous things that these guys are doing? And then such a tall building is impossible, you know, you cannot, I don't know why they thought it would be so tall. So I made a drawing to show that it was shorter than the RCA. I then kind of made a series of drawings showing that, you know, what I call the neck of it, containing a series of facilities that would make the bums happier, like from hairdressers to sports facilities to a swimming pool that you could swim right to the edge and enjoy the view while swimming, with a bar above it where you could drink as much as you like, and over the top of it a planetarium that you could then explore tipsy. And at this point we made a drawing in which we, before returning to Europe, in which we assembled all the buildings that we had designed either together or individually. So here is one of Rem's Welfare Palace hotels, and here is the Sphinx, which is kind of wedged in because there was no room to put it. Then we came to Europe, and we started taking part in competitions, one of which was a competition for the Parliament in The Hague in Holland. And the Parliament of The Hague was made up of a series of buildings of different ages and different periods, different styles, from Gothic to